Hello BookTube, it's Tony here from Locks to Reads. I almost forgot the name of my own channel then, which is always a good sign. This will be the last update before Christmas, as it's the 23rd of December. I'm off to my parents tomorrow. This is a kind of partly a little roundup of what I read over the last week, and partly some firming up of what I'm going to be reading in 2025. At its most ambitious. It'll undoubtedly be pared down and reviewed as the year goes on. But I have a kind of plan. So first of all, let's talk about what I read last week. I read Something to Answer For by P.H. Newby. That's the first Booker Prize winner from 1968. It's set in Port Said, just before, during, and just after the Suez Crisis. The main character is an Englishman who works as for what would probably be called an NGO now, which he is likely embezzling, and he served in Egypt during World War II, made some friends there, and one of his friends has died, and he goes over to Egypt at the request of the man's widow to, she thinks something suspicious about his death. It's a very odd book. It sort of starts off like a normal novel and then becomes a very weird, dreamlike, concussed book. What happens is the main character gets very drunk, gets robbed, and then smacked around the head, and what follows the book is very like, you can't trust the narrator. You couldn't trust the narrator really from the start, but you really can't trust it after he's been whacked around the head, and it becomes a very weird. And it's also, I think, an indictment of British colonialism and British, and also pokes at what Britain knew about the Holocaust and when. But that's sort of subdivision of the book. But it's mainly about like British people in foreign countries behaving in certain ways. As I said, I really enjoyed it, but it's a very odd book. So that's number one. Number two, I reread two Douglas Adams books. I reread The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, which is the second of the Dirk Gently books. It's probably my least favourite Douglas Adams novel. I enjoy it, but it's not my favourite. And it has a certain resemblance to American Gods by Neil Gaiman, in terms of gods on Earth, old gods on Earth. But it's still good, because I enjoy most of every Douglas Adams novel. I also reread. We need to come up with a word for when you've reread something more than X number of times, because reread doesn't do justice to how many times I've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I enjoyed it again. It's very funny. I need to listen to the radio series again, because it's been a while since I did that. The radio series is probably my favourite version of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because it has more in it. Even that, and some of the weird stuff like the Shoe Event Horizon gets dropped completely from the books, from what I remember. And the radio series is, I think, a little bit darker than the books, in terms of the motivations of some of the key characters. Then I read The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Cowell, which is the first in the Lady Astronaut series. It's an alternative history science fiction novel, as I said, part of a series, that starts with an asteroid strike on the east coast of the United States, which destroys a huge chunk of America, and starts a series of climatological things that lead to a discussion about moving humanity to Mars, to save humanity. The main character is a female computer, as in a mathematician and numbers and analyst, and ex-pilot from World War II. There were a lot of women who flew planes in World War Two in a theoretically non military capacity. They would transport planes from one place to another, from one airport, from one airport. I was about to say airport is not the right word, and I know it's not the right word, but I can't remember what the right word is. To another, and she's one of those. And when this process starts, she wants to become a lady astronaut, but there are things standing in her way from doing that. It's an interesting mix of alternate history and genuine history. She weaves both together. My one slight quibble, it's a very enjoyable book, it's very well written. My one slight quibble is it's very understandably because of the way the book starts, but it's very American focused. After all, the first woman in space was a Russian, and it looks like America is the only place doing. I know it becomes a centre for a sort of worldwide space thing, but it's clear that the Russians and the Chinese aren't involved, and I think that's, as I said, it's a minor quibble, but I enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to read the rest of them, and I like the basic idea. I kind of like an alternate history, but I don't like alternate history books where the Nazis have won World War Two or the Confederates have won the American Civil War. That's a completely personal thing. I just don't like, because you have to then create worlds run by terrible people, and then you have to justify either having a hero who is a Nazi or a Confederate, or you have to spend your time undoing what you've created, and it never works for me. To quote Indiana Jones, Nazis, I hate those guys. And the books about them, as in alternate histories, have the only exception I will make is for A Man in the High Castle, partly because that has an interesting alternate universe within an alternate universe to it, that I find quite interesting. Plus, I love Philip K. Dick, so there's that. And then the other two books I've read are Doctor Who novelisations. Marco Polo by John Lucaretti, which is a novelisation of the William Hartnell story Marco Polo, which is about the TARDIS crew interacting with Marco Polo. It involves them joining his caravan. There's a bad guy. We get to meet Kubla Khan, whose stately pleasure Dome decreed. It's fun. It has a very obvious villain, who is obvious in the TV series as well to everybody but Marco Polo. It's fun. And the other one which I finished this morning, is The Mythmakers by Donald Cotton. This is the Doctor Who. This is the novelisation of another William Hartnell Doctor Who story. It's Doctor Who dropped into the Iliad, and also tangentially touching on Troilus and Cressida. Although when they wrote this, they didn't really think through how Troilus and Cressida ends. But this is actually written. This is actually a very funny book. It sort of avoids any darkness. Is there is darkness in it because obviously you're involved in a war and people die, but it's actually written quite amusingly. It's actually written from the point. It's Homer narrating the story in this book, and he nips between the Greeks and the Trojans to catch on different parts of the plot. It's actually really brilliantly written. I really, really enjoyed it. For anybody who isn't a Doctor Who fan, basically every Doctor Who story from 1963 to 1989, and the TV movie, and now they've started doing it with new Doctor Who, was novelised. These are effectively children's books, but they're not for young children. They're for children, I would say, 10 to 14. They're little bite-sized things. They're usually about 150 pages, or certainly the earlier ones are. I don't know if any other television show has ever gone down the novelisation route quite as much as Doctor Who. It is this is a brilliant book. I'm going to be reading a lot of these over the next month because I finally decided that I need to either read them or sell them. And because I haven't read, I've read them all at least once, and I haven't got around to rereading them. They take me no time at all to read. They are because they are so, so the language is so straightforward. This and they're and I know the stories. And it's always interesting to see some of them. The quality varies. Some of them are very by bog standard, very quick novelizations of stories, and others the author, especially when the author of the story, the author of the novel is the author of the original story, or involved in the original story. Terrance Dicks wrote loads of them. He's brilliant at it. He knows how to tell a story. But sometimes he can cut it down a little bit too much to the bare bones. Sometimes he makes little alterations that he would have made and to tidy up some of the errors or mistakes that seem to be in the plot. And sometimes, but his best ones are usually the best ones of the era. Towards the end, they got like for the Sylvester McCoy era, they pretty much got the authors of the books to write their novelizations with a couple of exceptions, and they also allowed them to broaden what they put in. So, for example, the novelization of Battlefield, which is a Sylvester McCoy story, has a lot more info in it. So does the Curse of Fenric, another Sylvester McCoy story. So they're always fun to me. But these are like I hate to say palate cleansers because that when you're reading because that makes them sound like they don't have value. They are brilliant. They are brilliant books for what they do. And for a long time, like the Mythmakers doesn't exist on video. It's been wiped by the BBC. So for a lot of people, these are the first and only time they ever experience some of these Doctor Who stories, because they no longer exist. And actually, sometimes you've like for people like me, sometimes you read the novelization before you saw the TV series, and the TV series ends up being slightly disappointing because it doesn't fit with the pictures that you were sold by the novelizations. This is particularly true, I think, of early John Pertwee stories. So yeah, so that's what I've been reading this week. In terms of my plan for the year, there are two things I'm definitely going to be reading Milton, and Milton collateral Milton work. I'm definitely going to be reading Paradise Lost. But I'm going to read some other Milton work as well. I have the major work, so I can use that. I am definitely going to join Alyssa, aka Nursey Nurse Reads, Nerdy Nurse Reads, on her Edith Wharton read along. Although how long I stick to that, moot. But also fundamentally the thing I'm going to do, which I finally meant to do, is my ridiculous reading plan. As I said before, that starts with it's a sort of canon literature project, although it's broad. It's not Western canon. It's more about reading. I got to a point. I think it's when I was reading the Divine Comedy, where you kind of realise that books are conversations with other books. I mean, you can get a long way with medieval literature if you've read the Bible, Ovid, and Virgil. And the Aeneid. That'll get you a long way for references. But I kind of sort of got that sort of every book is one book, the conversation with books. So I wanted to start with the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I'm about to reread again for the third time. And I'm going to reread and then it's going to go through ancient Egypt, and then older Hindu texts, the Sanskrit stuff. Then it'll merge in with like China, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Byzantium, Japan, Korea. Yeah, and then it goes on and on through sort of Anglo-Saxon literature, into Renaissance Italy, and it goes through France, Germany, Italy, there may I've gathered for years like Penguin Classics and Oxford World's Classics, and then the odd ones which aren't in either of those for whatever reason. Penguin Classics, please do, or Oxford World's Classic, please do a big 1 volume Livy. They're all, you've split them up into several books. Yes, it would be a big chunky book, but you've got complete essays by Montaigne and the Fairy Queen. I don't think it would be much, and I think is it Clarissa, all as one book. So it wouldn't be out of kilter with your books as they are. But I'll ignore that quibble for the moment. That was a little sideline. And the process is, I don't know how many of those books I'm going to read over the course of a year. That isn't a speed tactic. I mean, a lot of, once you get to ancient Greece, a lot of that, the first parts of that is plays, philosophy, and history. Some of which will take longer to read than others. Like the Histories by Herodotus will take a while. I read that a long time ago, so this will be a reread. But I've got a new translation for that. Thucydides, Xenophon, but then you've got all the playwrights. So you've got Aeschylus, Aristophanes, Sophocles, and then you've got philosophers: Plato, Aristotle. And various others, and also you've got poets, Greek lyric poetry, what survives, Sappho, the tiny amount of her work that survives. I've read the Penguin Sappho. I've got If Not Winter, which is Anne Carson's translation, to read. So I'll read that when I get to Sappho. And you've got myths and legends as well. So you've got like Hesiod. Who else is in there? Oh, and you've got obviously the key, like the Odyssey, the Iliad, and then you get into the Romans, blah, 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 blah. As I said, this is a process. It's 2 full shelves to my left here, which I have organised in date order. The end of the second shelf is Tales from 1001 Nights, and Locke's Second Treatise of Government and Letter Concerning Toleration. So that's the that's part of the plan as well, and as is the birthday reading list. That's the other part of the plan. Now that probably means that my reading list for 2025 is 200 books, 300 books, one a day. It's not going to happen like that, but I do want to start that. I have been a long time preparing the ridiculous reading list project. I built a ridiculous reading list as a spreadsheet. B, I've built a list also of poets, of English poets, starting with. Well, I didn't include the Anglo-Saxons because most of those aren't named. But the first one on that list is Langland's Piers Plowman, which I've started reading. Which actually I started reading out of order, but I am on the. I'm still in the introduction actually because this is quite. This is a prose translation. I would like to get hold of a prose translation of a poem, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that. But I do prefer to have poetic translations of poems. And I know it's difficult. Also, this is originally in Middle English, which is difficult. It's not like Shakespeare where you can understand what with a bit of sort of thought what you're reading. Middle English is much harder because you can sometimes get the gist of it, but a lot of the time you can't even get that. Like for example, there's a sentence here that Christ may come in, the King's Son of Heaven. It's pretty obvious what it is when you see it written down, but it's actually hard. The whole line after line after line of it is actually hard. So this is a modern English translation of a Middle English poem. I don't know why. I can't remember why I picked this up, but I started reading this week. Um, it seemed like an ideal time to read it, and as I said, not sure why. So that's where we are. I hope you all have a good Christmas and a happy New Year, and that you eat as much as you want and drink as much as you want, or as little as you want. Um, and I will speak to you again probably in the new year. So have a good one. Bye bye.